Why are you so terrified, O you of little faith? Friends, this is the question that Jesus poses to his disciples in today's gospel passage. The disciples have gotten into a boat to cross the Sea of Galilee when all of a sudden they find themselves in the midst of a storm. They cry out for help, and Jesus, who had previously been asleep, wakes up and says to them, "Why are you so terrified, O you of little faith?" And then he proceeds to calm the storm, and the disciples are left amazed. Now, perhaps we can look at this story and take away from it the idea that if only the disciples had enough faith, then they wouldn't have been in that mess. But that is simply not the case. It is precisely because they had faith in Jesus and followed him that they ended up in the midst of a storm at sea. It is Jesus who is the first one to get onto the boat to cross the Sea of Galilee. It is the disciples who follow. And so Jesus does not promise us an exemption from the storms of life because we are faithful disciples. Often it is precisely because we are faithful disciples that we end up in the midst of a storm. I am sure it doesn't take too much time to think of the many storms that surround us today. Storms at the personal level, the communal level, the national level, and the global level. These storms are very real, and they can bring up a lot of fear within us. And so Jesus says to us also, "Why are you so terrified, O you of little faith?" Now, is Jesus saying to us, just believe hard enough and things will be fine. Things will get better just like that? No, I don't think so. I think that faith is so much more than some cognitive exercise of assenting to a set of propositions. Faith is first and foremost a relationship of trust. Trusting that no matter what storms we find ourselves in, Jesus is always there with us. At the end of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus promises his disciples, "I am with you always, until the end of the world." It is this promise that we must have faith in, especially when we find ourselves in the middle of a storm. Julian of Norwich was a mystic and visionary who was born in the 14th century in England. She went through turbulent times, times of the peasant revolt, times of a pandemic of the bubonic plague. She herself became very ill at one point and was near death when she received visions of the Passion of Christ. And when these visions were over, she wrote about them. Here is part of what she wrote. "If there is anywhere on earth a lover of God who is always kept safe, I know nothing of it, for it was not shown to me. But this was shown, that in falling and rising, we are always kept in that same precious love." Julian was a woman who knew what it was to be caught in the storms of life. And she displayed great faith in God, knowing that divine love was always surrounding her, always covering her, always sustaining her through it all. We are invited to step into this courageous life of faith, to step into the middle of a storm as faithful disciples, to do the work of Christ, to be Christ's hands and feet in this world, trusting that Jesus is right there with us. And when things get too scary, when we fear that we are inadequate, when we believe that there is nothing more that we can do, that it is all out of our hands, then we must call upon Jesus. We must cry out in our hour of need. For it is Jesus who is there to answer. It is Jesus who is there to calm the storms within us, to give us the peace that we so long for. May you find a moment of calm in the many storms of life. And may Jesus look upon all of us with a loving, peaceful gaze